First female candidate in the Spectre program. Colonel Victoria Ashford set the folder on the briefing table in the deliberate way of someone who had rehearsed the gesture without wanting it to look rehearsed. Not a drop, not a placement, something in between, with precision behind it. I want to make sure everyone in this room understands what that means. And what it doesn't. The briefing room at Whitfield Air Force Base held 12 men and 1 woman. Maya Calloway sat in the 3rd row from the front, not the front itself. She had picked that seat deliberately on her first day at Whitfield and had taken it every time since, close enough to see every expression without being close enough to perform for anyone. The November light through the high rectangular windows fell gray and thin across the table, the kind of morning that didn't offer anything it hadn't earned. Victoria Ashford was 52 years old, a colonel with a jawline that looked carved and a record that read cleaner than Maya suspected it was. She ran the evaluation board for the F-39 Spectre program, the Air Force's newest and least forgiving aircraft, a single-seat, high-speed, classified envelope jet that had killed 2 test pilots during development and offered no apology for it. The men in this room had each spent somewhere between 3 and 5 years proving they were ready for it. They had references, flight hours, and evaluations that read like monument inscriptions. Maya had spent 10 years. 10 years of being told she was next, being told to reapply, being told the timing wasn't right, being redirected toward other programs and other aircraft, and other ways of being excellent that weren't this one. She had been excellent in all of them. And then, 3 months ago, an assignment order had arrived with Whitfield Air Force Base on it, and she'd stopped being surprised and started being ready. Captain Calloway, Victoria's eyes found her with the kind of precision that isn't quite hostility and isn't quite curiosity, more like someone who has already run a calculation and is waiting to see if the answer holds. Your preliminary psych evaluation flagged some concerns. Before you proceed to the next evaluation phase, we'll need a secondary review. In the 2nd row, a pilot named Garrett Maya didn't know his first name yet, had only heard him called that shifted in his seat. The sound of it carried further than it needed to, in the particular way sounds carry when the person making them intends that. Maya said, "Understood, Colonel." Nothing added, nothing softened. Victoria held her gaze for exactly 1 extra beat, then shifted her attention to the logistics schedule as smoothly as if the exchange hadn't happened. At the head of the table, Wing Commander Cole Sterling had not spoken since the briefing began. He sat with his arms crossed and his uniform jacket folded over the back of his chair, a coffee mug in front of him that had probably gone cold an hour before anyone arrived. He was 6 feet and change, dark hair going gray at the temples, with the particular kind of stillness that develops in a person who has spent 20 years making decisions in situations where other people's decisions got them killed. Maya had met him 14 years ago at flight school. They had been in the same accelerated program for 3 months, briefly in the same orbit in the specific way that flight school created, and then she'd been reassigned to a base in the Pacific, and he'd stayed in the program, and that had been that. Saying they hadn't stayed in touch was accurate the way a lot of accurate things were. True on the surface and incomplete underneath. He looked at her when the room stood to be dismissed. Once, straight on. Not with warmth and not without it. The look of a man in the middle of a calculation he hadn't finished yet. Captain Calloway. He said it the same way he'd have said any name level, without inflection. Stay. She stayed. The room emptied. Through the windows, the flight line was beginning its morning. The low, purposeful rumble of aircraft starting up at the edge of earshot, a radio voice cutting through from somewhere down the tarmac, the sound of a fuel truck running its route. Victoria Ashford was the last to leave. She closed the briefing room door behind her with the careful click of someone who had every intention of picking this conversation back up. Cole set the cold coffee aside and looked at Maya the way she'd imagined he looked at a flight instrument, reading something unexpected. Not doubt exactly more the deliberate refusal to conclude too fast. Secondary psych evaluation isn't optional, he said. I know. If there's a documented concern, we follow the process. I understand the process, Commander. She kept her voice even, which cost her something. What I'd like to understand is the specific concern. I've passed every standard evaluation this program uses. I sat through the preliminary review 3 weeks ago and got no indication of any flag. So I'd like to know what came back. Cole said, Colonel Ashford's board determines the scope and content of those findings. I don't have the full evaluation report on my desk, that's not how the process runs, but you received enough of a summary to act on it. He held her gaze. There was something behind his expression, not quite a decision, and not quite the lack of one. I received enough to follow the protocol that says we run a secondary. And you defer to the board. Within the program's protocols, yes. Maya looked at him. He looked back. She had learned at flight school that Cole Sterling was a person who held things carefully and let go of them on his own schedule, and that trying to accelerate that process from the outside was a way to make sure nothing moved at all. She wasn't going to get what was behind his expression by pushing him for it. When's the secondary? She said. Thursday. Next week. Fine. She picked up her folder. Is that everything? He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she almost stood. Then he said, Your father flew with my class, before the current program, back when the Spectre was still in prototype development. You probably already know that. Maya went still. Not visibly, she didn't think visibly. She set the folder back down. I know that, she said carefully. Cole picked up the cold coffee mug, seemed to decide against it, set it back exactly where it had been. I'm mentioning it because it's a fact I'm aware of, and I don't like facts going unacknowledged. It's not something I intend to use against you. It's also not something I intend to use for you. It's just something both of us know is sitting in the room. He paused. That's the full extent of what I mean by it. Okay, Maya said. All right, he said. Thursday. She walked out. She had gone 3 steps down the hallway before she let herself process the specific weight of it, her father's name, in Cole Sterling's careful, measuring voice. In that room, in this program. James Calloway had died flying a Spectre prototype in October of 2003. The official finding was pilot error during a high-altitude maneuver. Maya had been reading that official finding for 20 years, had memorized every line of it, and still couldn't make the facts, as she understood them, fit the conclusion as the report presented it. The disbelief had started as grief and gradually, over years of her own flying career and thousands of hours in aircraft that behaved the way aircraft behaved, become something more technical and more stubborn. The understanding of a working pilot who knew the mission profile, knew the aircraft's characteristics, and could not make the physics of the situation produce the outcome the report described. Not without help that wasn't in the report. She walked to the hangar and went to work. Hector Ruiz was her crew chief, and had been for 2 years, through 1 overseas rotation and 1 base transfer, and approximately 600 maintenance logs that he maintained with the same precision he brought to everything, which was the precision of a man who understood that imprecision in this job meant someone didn't come home. He was compact, deliberate, with hands that showed the history of everything they'd worked on. And he had a habit of talking to aircraft as though they could hear him, not anthropomorphizing exactly, more like giving them the same professional respect he gave any system he was responsible for. He was in conversation with the Spectre's starboard engine housing when Maya found him, his remarks largely composed of specific objections to what the previous ground crew had done to the calibration settings. She waited until he reached a natural stopping point, then said, I need to talk to you about something. He climbed down from the maintenance platform and wiped his hands on a rag that transferred the grease from one surface to another without eliminating it. He looked at her with the focused attention he reserved for things that weren't performing the way they should. How bad? Someone altered my sim scores. He was quiet for a beat too long. Explain. The numbers on file don't reflect the runs I actually flew. My altitude hold values are down 12% from my actual performance. Approach timing is off by a margin that would put me in the bottom third of the program. If you read that file cold, without watching the runs yourself, it reads like I'm borderline qualified. She kept her voice flat, not because she wasn't angry, but because anger wasn't useful right now. I flew those approaches 11 times over 3 weeks. I know what I flew, Hector. Those numbers are not my numbers. He looked at the aircraft for a moment, then back at her. I found something 2 days ago, he said, in the maintenance logs from a ground test about 6 weeks back. The telemetry data recorded correctly, but the annotation someone added to the data uses the wrong threshold value. Specifically, an older version of the performance spec that was superseded 8 months ago. He folded the rag slowly. If a routine automated review ran against those entries, it would flag a discrepancy, but only if the reviewer was running against the current spec. If someone pulled that flag and presented it as a maintenance irregularity without the current spec context, it would look like a real problem with the aircraft or the pilot, and anyone who knew the current system well enough would spot the wrong spec number, Maya said. In about 30 seconds, yes, they stood with that in the noise of the hangar, the sound of the base's morning moving around them, engines and metal and the periodic burst of the intercom. I'm not reporting the sim scores yet, Maya said. If someone is watching to see whether I come apart when the ground gets pulled, I'd rather they think it's working. I want to fly. Clean, by the numbers. Nothing that gives them anything to point at. She felt the decision solidify as she said it, the particular sensation of committing to a course before you're entirely sure it's the right one, and going ahead anyway because the alternative is worse. Then, we deal with whatever comes. Hector's expression made clear he had thoughts about this approach. He chose not to voice them, which was its own form of loyalty. I'll keep copies of everything in the logs, he said. Every entry, with timestamps and my initials. Good. And keep your eye on anyone who goes near those logs between now and next Thursday. Anyone who doesn't have a maintenance reason to be in there. Already doing it, Hector said. He turned back to the engine housing and resumed his remarks to it, which seemed to involve a pointed critique of the previous shift's calibration choices. Maya let the conversation close and walked toward the far end of the hangar, where the morning light came through the bay doors in long, flat angles across the concrete floor. She stopped and looked at the Spectre on the maintenance stand. It was a remarkable aircraft, not beautiful in any conventional sense, but with the specific economy of something that had been designed to do one thing and stripped of every feature that existed for any other purpose. Clean lines, minimal surface area, an engine package that put more thrust per unit weight into the air than anything in the current inventory. Standing next to it, you understood why 2 test pilots had died in it during development, and why 12 men in this program had spent years trying to prove they were qualified for it. She thought about what it would feel like to push it to the top of its envelope. She thought about her father. Behind her, at the far end of the hangar, Victoria Ashford stood in the doorway that connected to the ground operations office. She had come through that door quietly, the way someone comes through a door when they are deliberately not announcing themselves, and she stood there with her arms at her sides and watched Maya for a full 30 seconds without speaking. The expression on Victoria's face in those 30 seconds was not something she would have shown in the briefing room. It was something more unguarded, more complicated, wearing the surface of professional calculation over something that ran at a different depth entirely. Then she walked back through the door. The latch clicked. The hangar didn't notice. In her office, where the filing system was impeccable and the desk surface was kept clear of anything that wasn't currently necessary, Victoria Ashford sat down and looked at a folder she kept in her bottom drawer and had looked at many times over the past 20 years without ever deciding what to do with it. The label on the folder said Callaway Incident 2003. The folder was not part of any official program record. It should not have existed. She had been aware of that for 20 years, and the awareness had not become easier. She picked up her phone. She had picked it up twice in the past 2 hours and set it back down. This time she dialed and let it connect. The line was answered on the second ring. A man's voice came through, smooth in the specific way that lobbying and government relations work, selected for the voice of someone who had learned that appearing unruffled was itself a form of leverage. Victoria said, "She's further along than I expected." A pause. Then, "No, I understand that. I'm telling you the operational reality on the ground. The secondary evaluation is not going to hold her. Her numbers are too clean. We need to consider moving the timeline up." She listened for a longer stretch. Her eyes moved to the folder, then away. "There are other avenues available. I'll identify which one is appropriate and I'll handle it." That's what I said I would do. She ended the call. She sat without moving for a moment. Outside her window, the flight line ran through its morning, that mix of engines and radio voices, and the mechanical specificity of a place where people did work that required them to be exactly right. She opened the folder and took out the photograph she had put in there a long time ago and looked at regularly and never shown to anyone. A pilot in full flight gear, standing beside a prototype aircraft, squinting into a sun that was 20 years gone. He looked something like Maya around the eyes in the particular set of the jaw, in something about the way his chin lifted when he looked into the camera rather than at it. She had noticed it the moment Maya Calloway walked into her briefing room 2 weeks ago, and she had been noticing it in the intervening days, in the way that you notice things you already know. She put the photograph back, locked the drawer, and went to manage the next problem on her list. The evaluation flight happened on a Tuesday morning with a sky the color of hammered steel and visibility that went all the way to the mountains on the eastern horizon. The flight line crew had the Spectre prepped by 5:45. Hector did the final walk-around with the thoroughness he always brought to it, moving around the aircraft in a deliberate sequence, his hands touching each surface. He checked the way a craftsman touches his work, not perfunctorily, but as a real inquiry. Maya suited up in the ready room and went through her pre-flight mental checklist in the particular quiet of someone who has trained so long for something that the ritual of preparation has become inseparable from the act itself. She flew 4 evaluation passes. The first was the basic envelope run, standard parameters, nothing dramatic, the kind of flight designed to establish a baseline. She flew it by the numbers and landed it cleanly. The second pass was the high-altitude segment, pushing the aircraft to the upper margins of its certified flight envelope. The third was the precision approach sequence, which was where the scoring got detailed. The fourth was a combination run that incorporated elements of all 3. She hit every benchmark on the evaluation matrix to within margins. The scoring system didn't have smaller subdivisions to express. The final approach on the precision sequence, the one that got the closest scrutiny, was the kind of approach that made the people watching from the tower go quiet. The way they go quiet when something is happening exactly the way it's supposed to and they don't want to disturb it. Cole was in the tower. He did not say anything when she brought the aircraft in and shut down on the flight line. He was at the display panel with his arms crossed and his coffee mug on the ledge beside him, looking at the scoring readout with an expression that was doing a lot of calculation very quietly. Maya climbed down from the cockpit and handed her helmet to Hector, who had the specific expression of a man who has just watched his aircraft perform exactly as designed and finds the confirmation satisfying in a professional way he'd never put into words. Clean, she said. Every run, he said. Not even close. She nodded and walked toward the debrief room, passing 3 of the other program candidates on the flight line who were watching her from varying distances. 2 of them looked away when her eyes moved toward them. The third, Garrett, held it for a moment with an expression she couldn't read and didn't spend time trying to. Victoria Ashford was already in the debrief room, seated at the far end of the table with a manila folder open in front of her, and an expression of professional neutrality that was working considerably harder than it looked. "Good flight, Captain," she said. "Thank you, Colonel. We'll still complete the secondary evaluation Thursday. The preliminary concern stands on the record until it's formally cleared." Victoria's tone was the tone of procedure being followed. "I also want to make you aware that an additional item has come to our attention. An incident report from your previous assignment, filed after your departure. A training exercise anomaly, 6 months ago." She slid a document across the table, the same unhurried, deliberate movement she used for everything. "I'd recommend reviewing it before Thursday so you can address it in that context." Maya picked it up. She read it once, steadily, line by line, without expression. She read it a second time. Then she set it face down on the table between them. "This report describes an incident I have no record of and no recollection of," she said. "No date on here matches any exercise I participated in, and the personnel named as witnesses don't include anyone I served alongside at that base. I'll be submitting a detailed response." "That's certainly within your rights," Victoria said. "Yes," Maya said. "It is." She walked out. Cole received the incident report at 9 the following morning, hand-delivered to his desk by Colonel Ashford's administrative aide in a sealed envelope marked with the program's formal routing designations. He read it standing up, which was how he read things he instinctively didn't want to settle into. He read it once. He read it twice. He set it down and walked to the window and looked at the flight line for a few minutes. Then he walked back to his desk and read it a third time, slowly, stopping at the paragraph that described specific personnel present during the supposed incident and finding Again, that not a single witness was named. No corroborating staff. No supervising officer. Anonymous submission, administrative routing, 6 months after the fact. He called Maya into his office at 11. She came in without hurry and sat across from him. He noticed she didn't look at the document on his desk, which meant she had anticipated what it was before she arrived, which meant she'd already thought several steps ahead of this conversation. He had, at flight school, found that quality in her both admirable and specific to herself. He still did. "I've reviewed the incident report," he said. "I submitted my response this morning," she said. "I know. I read it." He turned the incident report face down on the desk, which was a decision he hadn't quite planned to make in advance, but that felt right once he'd made it. "Pending the secondary evaluation and the investigation of this report, I'm suspending you from the qualification flight schedule." The room held that without moving. Maya said, "I understand. Not a question. Not resistance. Not visible effort to suppress resistance." She thanked him a flat. Even thank you that had no trace of sarcasm in it and also had nothing else in it, and she stood and walked out. Cole sat with the incident report face down on his desk for a long time. He didn't feel good about what he'd done, but feeling good about it was not the same thing as being right to do it. He'd received a documented report through the proper chain from an officer with the authority to submit it, and he'd acted on what the protocol said to do with that report. The protocol existed for reasons, and the reasons were generally good ones. But no named witnesses. Administrative routing. Anonymous at source. Filed 6 months after the event it described. He was looking at the fact of Maya Calloway flying a perfect evaluation sequence yesterday morning, by numbers no one in this program had turned in that cleanly, and then this document appearing on his desk 12 hours later, and the two facts were sitting in the same room together, and he was not sure they could both be true. He put the incident report in his desk drawer and pulled out his personal notepad and started writing down questions. Maya drove through the Whitfield Gate 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, through security and down the county road that ran east toward the town of Lindley. She'd found the photograph in her footlocker 3 days after arriving at Whitfield, tucked into the bottom beneath her spare flight suit, placed precisely, not accidentally dropped. Someone with key card access to the quarters had put it there. She hadn't told anyone. On the back of the photograph, in a handwriting that was controlled and careful, a street address and a storage unit number. The facility was at the far edge of Lindley, down a service road that ended at a row of metal roll-up doors in a gravel lot. Unit 14 was unlocked when she arrived, the padlock cut cleanly with a tool that had left no ragged edges. Either someone had just been here, or someone had cut it open and left it that way for her. She pulled the door up and went in. 2 cardboard boxes, 1 footlocker, the objects of an ordinary room, until you understood what they represented. Her father's final posting had produced 1 box that made it home. Civilian items, personal letters, the framed photographs her mother had kept on her bedside table for 15 years until they'd been moved to the mantelpiece, and then to a shelf in the guest room, and then to a box in the closet, not forgotten but protected. This was the rest of it. The professional life. The mission logs going back to the beginning of the Spectre prototype program. The technical journals her father had kept in his own handwriting, and a stack of program documents with classification markings that should have been properly disposed of or archived, and instead had been sitting in this storage unit for a period of time she couldn't yet determine. She crouched and opened the top journal. His handwriting was smaller than she remembered from his letters. Compact, precise. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write for a logbook rather than a page. She turned to the last entries, October of 2003. The entry dated October 14th, 4 days before he died, documented a telemetry flag on his assigned aircraft. A sensor reading in the flight envelope data was showing values outside the expected range. He had flagged it through the formal process, filed the paperwork that the process required, and received a clearance order in return. The flag had been reviewed, determined to be a sensor calibration anomaly. The aircraft was certified safe to fly. He wrote about receiving that clearance in a way that was careful and precise, the writing of a man who wanted the record to show exactly what he had been told and exactly what he had decided to do about it. He documented his own misgiving about the clearance, not insubordination, not refusal, just a clear and measured statement that his questions had been answered in a way that didn't entirely satisfy him and that he was flying anyway because the chain of command had certified the aircraft safe and he trusted the chain of command to have done its job. The override clearance was attached to the entry: date, authorization number, and a signature line. Maya turned her phone's flashlight on and looked at the signature. It read Victoria Ashford, but the paper was old fold lines from 20 years of storage, a slight yellowing at the margins, the specific texture of paper that had lived a long time in a box. The signature was not old. The ink sat on the surface of the paper's aging rather than integrated within it. Whoever had added Victoria Ashford's name to this override document had done it within the past few years, possibly more recently than that. And the original signature line was not entirely covered at the edge of Ashford's careful print, barely visible, the ghost of different ink and a different hand, the upstroke of an initial, the beginning of a name that wasn't hers. Maya photographed every page in both journals. Then she went through the cardboard boxes, item by item, methodical in the way the situation required. At the bottom of the second box, under a folded topographic map of the Nevada test range, she found a small flash drive in a Ziploc bag. A single letter written in black marker on a piece of masking tape. C. She took the drive with her. The file opened to 37 pages of technical correspondence from 2002 and 2003. Engineering reviews, contractor invoices, program memoranda, and a sustained series of internal communications about a specific flaw in the Spectre prototype's altitude hold sensor package. A contractor had identified the flaw formally, in writing, during the development phase. 8 months later, the same contractor had formally uncertified that finding withdrawn the flag, removed it from the official technical record so the program could proceed on its contracted delivery schedule without delay. The contractor was called Weston Aerospace Systems. The individual who had signed the original flag and then personally signed the uncertification letter was named Richard Weston. On the final page of the compiled document, tucked in loose, a printed personnel headshot and a short professional biography. Richard Weston, retired from Weston Aerospace Systems after the company's acquisition by a larger defense conglomerate, currently a senior partner at a government relations and lobbying firm in Washington. The biography was current recent enough that a recent search had produced it. Below it, in the same careful handwriting as the address on the storage unit. She'll want to know who she's dealing with. She'll. Maya sat in her car in the empty lot and turned the flash drive over in her hand, the gravel quiet around her, the road back to the base visible in the rearview mirror. She thought about who spent 20 years holding something this specific in this much order, and why a person like that would leave it for someone else to find, rather than carry it to its natural conclusion themselves. She thought about what it meant to be almost ready for a long time, and to keep finding reasons to stay almost. She drove back to base. She went to Cole's office at 11 that night. His light was on, which she had expected. She knocked once. He came to the door with the expression of a man who had been expecting something, though the specific form it was taking might not have been on his list. She set the flash drive on his desk and said, "Your name is on the drive." He looked at it, then at her. He sat down not quickly, the way he did everything, with a deliberateness that suggested the motion had been considered. He picked up the drive. "I know what's on it," he said. She had half expected that. She had held the other half in reserve against being wrong, and now she let it go. "Tell me," she said. He told her. In 2003, he'd been a junior program officer, flying lead position in a 2-aircraft formation test. Her father had been trailing him in the second prototype. Cole's aircraft was receiving clean telemetry data, his sensors were functioning within spec, his flight envelope data reading accurately. Her father's aircraft had been flagged for a sensor irregularity before the mission, which the ground clearance had designated as a calibration anomaly and authorized for flight. But over the radio, at altitude, Cole had noticed something in the way the second aircraft was holding its position, small deviations in the trail position, not dramatic, the kind of thing that looked like turbulence correction from a ground camera but felt, to a pilot flying 30 feet ahead of it, like something else. He had called it over the radio. He had said, specifically, that the trail aircraft's position corrections suggested a control surface response, inconsistent with the reported telemetry. Ground control had come back with the clearance confirmation. Both aircraft certified, safe, mission green, proceed as planned. He had proceeded. Her father had come back from that mission. The flaw in the sensor package had not killed James Calloway that day. It had killed him 2 weeks later, on a subsequent mission, on his third test, past the altitude hold failure cascading into a control surface input that the aircraft's flight management system interpreted incorrectly, and the aircraft had gone past its recovery envelope before the correction could be made. By then, Cole's best friend had also died in the program, in a different aircraft, a different mission profile. The same system flaw, expressed differently. 2 men, 2 separate flights. The same root cause that Western Aerospace Systems had flagged, uncertified, and buried in a program document that nobody was supposed to pull. Cole had filed a full report. It had been acknowledged. He'd followed up over the course of a year 3 separate follow-ups. Each one met with an administrative response that said the matter was under review and he would be notified of any developments. The third follow-up had been met with a quiet conversation in a hallway with a JAG officer who had said, in language that was careful enough to not constitute a direct threat, that pursuing the matter further without authorization from program oversight could create complications for everyone named in the original report, including Cole himself. He had been 29. He had made the calculation a 29-year-old makes when a JAG officer tells him something in a hallway and he has no evidence on his side except a sealed report and a year of administrative silence. When the Spectre program came back online, he said, I requested my original mission logs be placed under seal. I told myself I was preserving them for an investigation that hadn't come yet, but would. Someone with oversight access told me the seal was a first step, that it would protect the materials until the proper channel opened. He set the flash drive on the desk. Someone added Ashford's name to your father's override document. The original signature was mine. The room was very quiet. Outside, the base ran its nighttime operations quieter than the day, but never fully still. Maya said, You signed the override. I relayed a ground clearance order. I was the only officer in radio range at that moment. The authorization came through ground control, and it went through my voice and into my logbook as a relay. He didn't look away from her. It wasn't my authorization to give or withhold. I was passing a clearance that had already been made above me. But it went through my hands, and my hands are in the record. And someone understood that detail was more valuable hidden in a sealed archive than on a document where it might prompt questions. He looked at the desk. My name on the override document creates a cleaner story than my name in a transmission log. Ashford's name on the override document creates a usable target. I'm running this program. She's an operational officer with enough exposure to be pressured. Whoever managed this understood how to arrange the pieces. Weston, Maya said. Cole looked at her. Richard Weston has been in lobbying for 15 years, she said. That's 15 years of relationships in exactly the offices that would handle a program inquiry. He knows who owes what to whom and how to apply it. He's not the one making the phone calls himself. He's the one who knows which phone calls to make on which favors. She paused. Someone put that file on the drive and placed it where I would find it. Someone who had access to your sealed records and to my father's personal effects and to my footlocker. Someone who has been holding this and decided, finally, that they were done holding it but couldn't hand it over directly. They sat with that. Cole said, Give me 48 hours. Maya said, You have 24. She stood. Pull the psych evaluation, Cole. The preliminary one, the secondary review is based on. Pull the actual evaluation record, not the summary that went to the board. She picked up her jacket. And pull the sim scoring records, the originals from the session logs, not what's on file in my program folder. He said, I know. She went out. Hector had built a quiet and mutually beneficial professional understanding over 2 years with a base record specialist he referred to only as T, which Maya had stopped asking about because the answer involved the kind of reciprocal obligations that kept organizations running and were better left unexamined. What T could access, when the access was warranted and the right paperwork existed, was the Personnel Evaluation Archive, the folder system behind the program's formal records, where the original documents lived, before they were abstracted into the summary reports that circulated to the evaluation board. By 10 the following morning, Cole was in his office with 2 evaluation reports on his desk, one on each side. The left one was the preliminary psych evaluation on file in the Spectre program. Record the one bearing Maya Calloway's name, the one that had triggered the secondary review, the one that had provided the documented basis for every procedural step that followed, including Cole's own suspension order. The right one was the evaluation actually conducted on Maya Calloway, completed by the program's assigned clinical psychologist, with Maya's identifying information on the cover page and the psychologist's signature on each internal page and a date stamp that was consistent with the program timeline. He looked at them side by side for a long time. The document on the left bore Maya's name on the cover page. Every page after that belonged to a pilot named Aaron Kelsey, a candidate who had gone through a different program 8 months ago, whose evaluation had been honest and accurate, and who had not advanced past the evaluation phase for reasons that had nothing to do with anything in this room. Kelsey's scores, Kelsey's clinical notations, Kelsey's evaluator's observations about performance under simulated high-stress conditions, all of it under Maya Calloway's name, produced as the basis for a secondary review submitted through Victoria Ashford's board to Cole's desk and acted upon. Cole straightened the 2 documents and set them parallel to each other and stood with his hands at his sides. He thought about the conversation in the hallway on his way to the suspension meeting with Maya. He thought about her thanking him in the flat, even way that had nothing in it except the acknowledgement that he'd made a call and she'd heard it. He thought about her walking out. He picked up his phone and called General Pierce. The full squadron assembled at 1400 hours on Cole's request. Not an emergency assembly, but not a routine one either. The men arranged themselves with the particular attention that people pay when something is happening that doesn't happen in the ordinary course of operation. Cole stood at the front without notes. Maya was in the 3rd row. Victoria Ashford stood in the back of the room, with her hands clasped at her waist, her posture correct, her expression arranged in professional neutrality. Captain Calloway's suspension from the qualification flight schedule is rescinded effective immediately, Cole said. The incident report previously submitted to my desk has been referred for formal investigation. The preliminary psych evaluation that formed the basis for the secondary review has similarly been referred for investigation. He paused. All qualification timelines for Captain Calloway are restored as of this afternoon. No one said anything. In the 2nd row, someone shifted weight from one foot to the other. That's all, Cole said. The room moved. Victoria Ashford walked to the door with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who is managing their composure with the full force of 20 years of professional practice. She did not look at Cole. She did not look at Maya. She passed through the door, and her footsteps in the corridor were precise and even and faded at a normal rate. Cole watched the door close. The quality of his attention in the moment after it closed was the attention of someone who has just pulled a thread and is starting to understand what's attached to the other end of it. He found Maya in the corridor. He said, "She's making calls right now. I know. She'll get to the Pentagon before we open a formal investigation. She has people there who owe her, and they're positioned to slow this down in ways I can't counter through the program's chain. She has Weston's people there," Maya said, "which means she has leverage in both directions, and so do we, once we've established the record." She looked at him. "Let her escalate. Everything she files now has to go on the record, and we're already on the record." He looked at her for a moment. "We have maybe 2 days before this gets complicated in ways I can't predict." "We already had 2 days," she said. "Thank you for correcting it. It took me too long." "It took what it took," she said. And she walked away from him, and he stood in the corridor for a moment and let her. Victoria Ashford came back. She flew in from Washington on an evening shuttle and was in Pierce's office before 10 that night, with a sealed envelope on the desk, and whatever she had decided to finally say after 20 years, Cole found out the next morning at 4:45, when Pierce's aide arrived at his door with a Pentagon memorandum. Department of Defense, Office of Program Oversight, citing ongoing investigation of procedural irregularities in the Spectre qualification program, requesting postponement of all qualification activities pending resolution. Pierce read it in his office. Cole stood across from him and read the copy. Pierce passed over without comment. Pierce said, Weston's firm represents 2 contractors under separate DoD review. That's the pressure point. She made 3 calls last night, and those calls made 2 more. And now I have this. He set the memo down. My hands are tied, Sterling, Cole said. Then put it on the record. Sign the postponement order formally, and I'll respond with a formal objection and my signature. And let's see how long the people in that Pentagon office want to be the ones on the record blocking a qualification flight while a procurement fraud inquiry is opening inside the same program. Pierce looked at him with the look of a man determining the stability of the ground before he steps on it. That's your command, he said. You understand that? Yes, Cole said. I understand that. Pierce picked up his phone. The call lasted 14 minutes. He set it down and said, without inflection, flight's on. 0600. Maya was in the ready room at 5:30, sitting with her father's flight log in front of her. Not reading it, keeping it company, in the way you keep company with something that matters without needing to be doing anything about it. She looked up when Cole came in. He sat across from her and told her the flight was on. She said she knew Hector had sent word. She told him Victoria had filed a cooperation statement with Base Legal the night before. Do you know what's in it? He said. Hector has a source in the legal office, she said. The statement is comprehensive. Everything she has, the override, the contractor communications she retained, Weston's name and what he did. She looked at the log. She kept records. Cole. She held on to the evidence that could have opened this 20 years ago, and she used it as protection, and she used it as leverage, and eventually she used it to find me. She paused. She put my name on the candidate list. 3 years ago, he said. She told Pierce last night. She told me something too. Not directly, she left me the file. Maya turned the log over in her hands. She thought that if I came up through the program legitimately, the investigation would follow. She thought she could manage how it came out. And then I started succeeding faster than she expected. And she panicked and started slowing me down. And then at 2 in the morning, she drove to a storage facility and put 20 years of evidence in a box for me to find. She looked at him. She was not ready. She'd been not ready for a long time, and she kept finding ways to stay that way. And then she ran out of them. Cole said, That doesn't make what she did to you acceptable. No, Maya said. It doesn't. He sat with that. Outside, the base was running its earliest morning business. The hour before dawn, when the flight line crew prepped aircraft and the tower ran its equipment checks and everything was oriented toward the sky. He said, Whatever happens in the inquiry, my sealed report will be part of it. I've given my statement. What comes from that is going to depend on things I can't control. I've read the report, she said. He looked at her. The full text, she said. T accessed it last week. I asked Hector to ask. She looked at him steadily. A junior officer who flagged a problem, relayed an order he was given through the correct channel, followed up 3 times through the correct process, and got stopped at the JAG officer in a hallway level. That's what it says, not what you're afraid it says. He held her gaze. The relay is still in my logbook. The document with the altered signature still has my name underneath it. Yes, she said. And now so does the forensic evaluation of that document, which establishes that the signature on top was added digitally to a paper document after the fact. She set the log on the table between them. I'm not going to spend the rest of my career being angry at the people who trusted the wrong thing. I'm going to be angry at the people who made it wrong to trust. He was quiet for a moment. Then, there's something I should tell you. About the 3rd pass, at the top of the high-altitude run. She waited. Every Spectre wants to pull left up there. It's a characteristic of the control surface geometry at that speed, a very slight asymmetry in the aerodynamic loading that shows up above a specific threshold. You don't fight it. He held her gaze. You let it run for 2 seconds, and then you correct. The manual doesn't mention it because the designers considered it within normal variation. Every pilot who's flown that pass at that altitude learns it, and most of them fight it, and the correction costs them a clean line. 2 seconds is the difference. Maya looked at him for a long moment. That's not in any material I've been given. No, he said. It's in 14 years of watching the aircraft from the tower. Something shifted between them, not the complicated thing they'd been working around for a week, but the simpler thing underneath it. Two people who spoke the same language and had stopped pretending the language wasn't there. 2 seconds, she said. 2 seconds, he said. She stood, picked up her helmet bag. At the door, she stopped. She said, "Don't be in the tower for me. Be there because you want to see what this aircraft can do." She walked out. He sat in the empty ready room for a while. Then he went to the tower. In Pierce's office, Victoria Ashford sat with her back straight and her uniform correct and 20 years of something on her face that she'd been keeping arranged and was finally putting down. Cole Sterling and Maya Calloway were also in the room, which Victoria had not requested and Pierce had insisted on. Maya sat in the chair closest to the window, her hands on her knees, watching Victoria with the specific attention of someone who has been waiting a long time to hear something said out loud. Victoria looked at Maya once, at the beginning. Then she looked at Pierce, and she started talking, and she didn't look away from Pierce again until it was over. She started at the beginning. The beginning was 2002, and it started not with a decision she'd made, but with a document she had been handed and told to sign. She'd been a program liaison, young, capable, operating in the first tier of a command structure that moved information up and authorization down, and depended on each level trusting the level above it. She'd been told that the telemetry flag had been reviewed at the engineering level and determined to be a sensor calibration issue. She'd been shown documentation that supported that determination. She'd been told that the contractor's assessment had been independently verified, and she had signed the override clearance for James Calloway's aircraft because the chain above her had said to, and the chain above her was the chain of command, and she had trusted it. The chain of command had been wrong. Richard Weston had produced the supporting documentation himself. The independent verification had been Weston telling the right person at the right level that the verification had been done. The flag had been real, and Weston had known it was real, and he had buried it because the cost of fixing the sensor package would have delayed the program by 8 months and put his contract at risk. James Calloway had died. Then another pilot had died, and Victoria Ashford had sat with her name on a clearance order and understood, gradually and then all at once, that the clearance she had signed was not the clearance she'd been told she was signing. She had done nothing. She had done nothing because Weston had come to her 18 months after the second death with a full account of the override chain that had her name prominently in it, and no mention of what she'd been told or the documents she'd been shown. He'd said that any inquiry would read the paper record, and the paper record said she'd authorized the clearance, and there was no surviving copy of the materials she'd been given that could establish what she'd been told. He'd said her options were limited. He'd been right. She had cooperated with him for 20 years. Not actively, she hadn't produced false documents or filed fraudulent reports. She had simply said nothing. She had exercised the particular power of institutional silence, which was that a person in a position of authority who says nothing about something they know becomes, over time, a weight pressing down on the investigation that never opened. And then a pilot named Maya Calloway had come up through the qualification pipeline, and Victoria had looked at a photograph in a folder and at a woman in her briefing room, and had understood that she was not, in fact, going to be able to keep doing nothing indefinitely. Pierce said, "Why did you put her name on the candidate list?" Victoria looked at her hands. "Because James Calloway had a daughter who became a pilot," she said. "Because I thought if she came up through legitimate channels, if she was good enough, and she was, I knew she was before she arrived, the inquiry would follow her. I told myself I was giving her the chance she deserved and creating the conditions for the truth to come out on its own." She paused. "I was also controlling it. I thought I could manage when and how it happened," Pierce said. "And when she started moving faster than you expected, I panicked," Victoria said. "The word came out without decoration. I slowed her down. I fabricated grounds. I used the board to introduce delays that weren't based on anything real." She looked at the envelope on Pierce's desk, "And then I drove to a storage facility at 2 in the morning and put everything I had in a box for her to find. Because I was done. I had been almost done for a long time, and I kept finding reasons to stay almost. And then one night I wasn't able to find them anymore." Pierce said, "The statement in the envelope." "Everything," she said. "The override chain as I experienced it. The documentation Weston showed me in 2005, the communications I retained, his name and the names of the individuals he worked through. The full account of every point where I failed to act." She looked at the envelope. I should have filed that 20 years ago. The fact that I didn't is something I'm going to have to account for. I understand that. There was a silence. Maya said, "You blocked me for 4 months." Victoria looked at her directly for the first time since the meeting started. "Yes, you fabricated a psych evaluation. You produced a false incident report. You had a wing commander suspend me from qualified flight status based on documents you knew were fraudulent." Maya's voice was level, not cold, not warm. Level in the way of someone who has decided that the most honest thing they can do is not perform anything about how they feel. "You want me to weigh that against the storage unit?" "I'm not asking you to weigh anything," Victoria said. "You put me in a program to open an investigation, and then when the investigation started to open, you made it worse instead of better. You manufactured the same kind of problem that killed my father, and you pointed it at me." Victoria held her gaze. "Yes," she said. "I did. You want to tell me it was complicated." "It was complicated," Victoria said. "That doesn't make it acceptable. I'm not sitting here trying to make it acceptable." She kept her eyes on Maya. "I was afraid. I've been afraid for 20 years. And fear does things to people over a long enough timeline that those people wouldn't recognize in themselves if you showed them a picture. I made choices that I could construct justifications for in the moment, and the justifications were thin, and I knew they were thin, and I made them anyway." She paused. "Calling that complicated is the most honest thing I can say about it. It doesn't make it right." Maya looked at her for a long moment. "My father asked questions before he flew that last mission," she said. "He put them on the record. He trusted the record meant something." "It should have meant something," Victoria said. "You were part of the system that made it mean nothing." Victoria said, "I know that." The room was quiet. Pierce sat with the envelope on his desk and didn't speak. Maya said, "Is there anything in that statement that will actually hold Weston accountable?" Victoria said, "The communications I retained established that the uncertification of the censor flag was done with full knowledge of the flag's validity. He knew it was a real problem, and he buried it. That's in writing, in his communications to the program office. Yes, it will hold him." Maya looked at her for another moment. Then she looked at the envelope on Pierce's desk and looked back at Victoria. "Then file it," she said. "That's all I have to say to you." Victoria stood. Pierce said nothing. Victoria picked up her service cap from the arm of the chair and held it at her side and looked at Maya with something that wasn't quite a request and wasn't quite an apology, something older and more worn than either. Then she looked away. "She is an exceptional pilot," Victoria said. To Pierce, to the room, to whatever record was being kept. "She would have qualified 3 years ago. The fact that she didn't is my doing, and it belongs on my account." Pierce said, "The statement, Colonel." "Yes," Victoria said. "The statement." She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. She said, without turning around, "She flies like him. In the approach geometry, the way she reads the angle and holds it without overcorrecting, she flies exactly like him." She didn't look back when she said it. She went out. The inquiry opened formally within the week. It moved the way serious inquiries move when they have specific names and documented evidence at the start steadily, with the grinding accumulation of institutional process that could not be hurried and could not, once fully in motion, be easily stopped. Richard Weston's name was in the referral. His firm was in the referral. The contractor communications Victoria had retained for 20 years evidence of what she'd been given and what she'd been told, evidence that established the context around her signature were in the referral, and they would shape what the inquiry concluded about her role. Her attorney argued cooperation and comprehensive voluntary disclosure. That argument would take time to resolve, and it would not resolve cleanly, but it would resolve. Victoria Ashford was relieved of command pending the investigation's outcome. Her last act at Whitfield was to hand the cooperation statement to Pierce's aide in the corridor outside the general's office. Cole came down the corridor from the opposite direction, and they stopped in the hallway with perhaps 6 feet between them. She said, "I put her name on the list 3 years ago. I genuinely believed I was giving her what she deserved. I also believed I could control how it came out. Both of those things were true at the same time." Cole said, "You almost managed her out of the program." She looked at him. The expression on her face in that moment was not a single thing. It was what you get from 20 years of carrying something that changes shape depending on what day it is and what you're willing to look at. The statement has everything I have. Every name and every communication and every moment where I made the wrong call. She straightened her jacket. I know it doesn't fix what I did to her, Cole said. James Calloway deserved better than 20 years. She held that for a moment. Then she said, yes, he did. She walked past him and down the corridor and through the door to the flight line, and Cole stood in the hallway and listened to her footsteps go and didn't look for a clean line to put on it. Some things didn't have one. He found Maya in the ready room that evening. She was sitting with her father's flight log open, keeping it company in the particular way she had of letting important things just be present without needing to perform something about them. She looked up when he came in. She already knew about Victoria's statement Hector's network was efficient. She told him what she understood of it, and he filled in the parts she didn't have, and they sat with the full picture of it for a while. She said, she was afraid for 20 years, and she made that everyone else's problem, including my father's. She turned the log on the table. I can understand how a person gets there, and I can be angry about it at the same time. Those aren't the same thing, and they don't cancel each other out. He said, no, they don't, Maya said. She said he flies like me. He waited. She said it about my father. The way I hold the approach angle, Maya looked at the log. I didn't know that. I've never had anyone tell me that before. She was quiet for a moment. My mother always said I had his stubbornness. His sister said I had his handwriting. No one ever told me I had his hands, Cole said. It's not just the hands. It's the way you read the geometry from 300 yards out. Most pilots adjust continuously small corrections, frequent corrections. The whole approach is one long negotiation. Your father made one read, committed to it, and held. You do the same thing. He paused. I noticed it watching the evaluation flight. I noticed it before that, in the sim review footage. She looked at him. You watched my sim footage. I watch everyone's sim footage. That's not what I asked. He held her gaze. I watched yours more than once, he said. She said, because of my father. At first, he said. Then because of what I was watching. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when the important thing has just been said, and both people are letting it settle. Outside, the base moved through its evening, the sound of the last flights coming in, the ground crews calling to each other, the radio traffic thinning as the flight line wound down. She said, you could have just told me. About the relay. About the sealed report. When I first arrived, I thought about it, he said. I didn't know what you knew, or what you'd come here looking for, or whether telling you would help or put you in a position I couldn't protect. I wasn't looking for protection. I know, he said. That's part of what made it difficult. She turned the log over once in her hands. Then she set it down on the table between them, the October 14th entry facing up. He wrote in here about a pilot in the lead aircraft who called the discrepancy over the radio, she said. He didn't name you, but he wrote that whoever made that call had good eyes and good instincts, and that if anyone had listened, it might have been different. She paused. He thought someone was paying attention. He went up believing that. Cole said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. He was right that someone was paying attention. He was wrong that it was enough. He trusted the system, Maya said. The system was broken in ways he couldn't see. She looked at Cole. You were part of the system that tried to fix it. That's not the same as being part of the system that broke it, he said. The line between those is thinner than I'd like. She said, most important lines are, I've submitted the full statement, he said. The relay, the logbook, the original report, the 3 follow-ups, the hallway conversation, all of it. I read the original report, she said, cover to cover. A junior officer who identified a problem reported it through the correct process and got stopped at the institutional level. That's what it says. That's what it was. She paused. The inquiry is going to look at everything. I can't tell you how they'll characterize the relay, but I can tell you what I think when I read it. What do you think? She said. I think you tried to do the right thing and a hallway conversation stopped you. And then you held the report for 15 years because you were waiting for someone better placed to open it. And then I walked into your briefing room, and you started doing the right thing again. She looked at him. I'm not going to spend my career being angry at the people who trusted the wrong things. That's reserved for the people who made it wrong to trust. He was quiet for a moment, then, what you said this morning, before the flight. She waited. Don't be there for me, he said. Be there because you want to see what the aircraft can do. She held his gaze. I was there for both reasons, he said. The ready room was quiet. Outside the windows, the base was running its evening routine, engines winding down, the shift change sounds, the particular quality of a base at dusk, when the operational tempo drops a notch and the people who've been at it all day start handing off to the people who'll be at it all night. Something between them had been held at a certain distance for the better part of 2 weeks, and it had stopped being held there. Tell me what it looked like from the tower, she said. He told her. The angle she'd taken off the runway, steeper than training aircraft but clean within the envelope. The way the landing gear had come up on schedule, Hector's work, precise as always. The first turn north, banked correctly, no wasted energy. The second pass over the evaluation zone. The third pass, at the top of the high-altitude segment, where from the tower you could see the aircraft hold the left pull for 2 seconds. He counted them. He told her he stood at the display and counted 2 seconds and then make the correction, a small, precise input, the kind that only comes from a pilot who knows what they're doing well enough to trust it. She told him what those same 2 seconds had felt like from the cockpit, the way the aircraft communicated through the stick at that speed and altitude, the specific quality of the pull, not dramatic, not alarming, more like an opinion the aircraft was expressing that she was entitled to disagree with once she'd heard it out. The 2 seconds of sitting with it, the correction that felt, when she made it, like the most natural thing she'd done all morning. They were in the ready room for close to an hour, going through the flight from both positions, trading observations back and forth in the easy, specific way of 2 people who understand the same things and have stopped protecting themselves from the evidence of that. At some point she said, Cole. He waited. When this is done, she said, when the formal qualification goes through and the inquiry has what it needs, I want to take you up. He said, in the Spectre. I told you I'd show you. He said, you told me I should see the view. She looked at him. Same thing, she said. He said, yes, it is. And she could see that the calculation had finished, and what it had come out to was simpler than either of them had been treating it. He said, name the day. Saturday, she said. He said, Saturday. She picked up her jacket, picked up the flight log. She stood and looked at him across the table for a moment, the particular look of someone who has decided to stop being careful about what they let show and is finding that the decision is easier than expected. She said, the sky doesn't lie. That's the last line in the log. My father wrote it 4 days before he died. He said, I know. I read his reports. Years ago, when I was still trying to get someone to listen, I read them looking for anything that would help open the inquiry. He paused. He wrote that line at the end of the October 14th entry, not as a conclusion, more as a reminder to himself. She said, he was right about it. She walked out. The door swung closed behind her, and he sat in the ready room for a while, in the evening quiet, with the flight line making its sounds outside the windows purposeful and alive and oriented, as it always was, toward the sky. The formal qualification board convened the following week. The evaluation scores stood without challenge, because the scores were what they were, and there was nothing left in the program record to challenge them with. General Pierce signed the recommendation. Wing Commander Sterling countersigned. Maya Calloway became the first woman to qualify on the F-39 Spectre, which became a fact in the program's official record alongside her father's name in a different section, a section that would, in the months to come, be annotated with a reclassification of his 2003 death from pilot error to equipment failure, resulting from contractor misrepresentation of safety data. The reclassification arrived in Maya's quarters on a Tuesday afternoon, a formal letter from the Program Oversight Office. She read it twice. She sat with it for a long time, not celebrating, not grieving exactly, more experiencing the specific feeling of a correction that has come too late to undo the thing it corrects and is still, regardless, real. She called her mother that evening. Her mother was quiet on the line for a long time after Maya told her. Then she said, in the careful voice of someone who has been holding something for a long time, "I never believed it was his mistake." She stopped. "I didn't know what else to do with that," Maya said. "Neither did I. For a long time." Her mother said, "Are you all right?" Maya thought about the question, the real version of it, not the polite version. She thought about the ready room and the flight log and the October 14th entry and the 2 seconds at altitude and everything that had happened in the weeks since she'd driven through the gate at Whitfield Air Force Base. "I'm better than I've been in a while," she said. "I think that's accurate." Her mother was quiet. Then, "He would have been proud." Maya said, "I know. That's not why I did it." Her mother said, "I know that too. That's part of what I mean." The inquiry into the Weston procurement fraud moved on its own schedule, which was slower than anyone who needed it to move faster would have preferred, and faster than inquiries with this many layers of institutional interest had typically moved before. Weston retained counsel, and the counsel was good, and the process would take the time it took. But it was on the record, in the right offices, with the right names in the right places. It was not going to close without leaving a mark on everything it touched. Victoria Ashford's cooperation was comprehensive enough to be meaningful. What the formal outcome would be for her, whether the voluntary disclosure and the 20 years of retained evidence would weigh against the 20 years of silence, was something her attorney would argue and the process would determine, and it was not going to be clean or simple, which was appropriate, because what she had done was not clean or simple. She had done something wrong and something right, with the same set of facts, across the same 2 decades, and the accounting of that was going to be complicated. The Callaway incident, that was the official designation, now was being examined by 3 separate investigative offices. Weston's name was in each of them. On the Saturday after the qualification, Hector had the Spectre prepped by 8 in the morning, which was earlier than he needed to be there, and exactly the time he chose because he had opinions about pre-flight thoroughness that he preferred to implement without time pressure. Cole arrived at the flight line at 8:30 in civilian clothes, which was unusual enough that 2 of the ground crew looked twice. Maya was already there, in her flight suit, doing her own walk-around out of habit. She looked at him when he walked up. He said, "You're sure the 2-seat variant handles the same?" She said, "Close enough. The evaluation on the back seat instrumentation is different. You'll see the same data I see, with a half-second lag." He said, "Half a second is a long time." She said, "That's why you trust the pilot." He stood beside the aircraft and looked at it for a moment, the specific economy of its design, the way nothing existed on it that didn't need to. Then he said, "All right." She climbed up. He climbed up behind her. Hector checked the canopy seals and patted the fuselage once in the particular way he patted things that had his confidence, and backed away. The engines came up. The tower cleared them for runway 07. Maya taxied out in the morning calm, the sky clear from horizon to horizon, the desert beyond the base fence already warming in the early sun. She ran the final check, set the throttle, and looked at the runway ahead. She pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft moved, then accelerated, then was moving in a way that made acceleration feel like the wrong word for it, the specific, committed force of a machine that has been built to do one thing and is doing it with its full attention. In the back seat, Cole watched the airspeed indicator climb and felt the nose rotate and felt the aircraft leave the ground, and the ground falling away was not the falling away of a transport or a trainer or anything he'd been in before. This was the Spectre leaving the ground on the Spectre's terms, which were demanding and total and entirely their own. The gear came up, the aircraft banked north, clean, the horizon swinging wide. Below them, the base shrank the flight line, the tower, the rows of hangars, the grid of the base roads. Beyond it, the desert. Maya keyed the intercom. She said, "How does it look?" Cole said, "Different from the tower." She said, "Better or worse?" He said, "Better." She took them up, the 2nd altitude band, then the 3rd, climbing with the specific willing authority of an aircraft that has been designed for exactly this and is operating in its element. At the top of the high-altitude segment, the altitude of the evaluation pass, the point where the control surface geometry made its opinion known, Maya let the left pull run for 2 seconds, and Cole counted them from the back seat, And then the correction came, small and precise. And the aircraft held its line like an argument that had been made correctly. He said, 2 seconds. She said, 2 seconds. They held altitude for a minute, the sky enormous around them and the ground a long way below, and Cole looked at the horizon and understood something about what his best friend and James Calloway and the others had understood up here, in the place where the aircraft was finally doing what it had been built to do. The sky doesn't lie. What it offered was exactly what it was, no more, no less. And the only question was whether you were ready for it. He was ready for it. Maya said, "Ready to come down?" He said, "Not yet." She said, "Okay." They stayed up for another 10 minutes, and neither of them said much, and the silence was the comfortable kind that doesn't need to be managed or explained. Below them, the inquiry moved forward on its schedule, and the records were being corrected, and the people who had held things too long were beginning to account for it. Above them, the sky was exactly what it was. The sky doesn't lie. Everything below it was still learning to catch up, but it was trying. Some days, that was the whole of it, and it was enough. He is greater than is greater than is greater than. End of story. Total word count, 12,477.